What does it mean to be called crazy in a crazy world? Listen to Madness Radio, Voices and Visions from Outside Mental Health. Sponsored by the Icarus Project and Portland Hearing Voices, Madness Radio can be heard on KBOO-FM, the Pacifica Network, and online at madnessradio.net. Welcome to Madness Radio. This is your host, Will Hall. Today, my guest is Gogo Ekhaya Esima. Gogo Ekhaya is a traditional healer, a teacher, and a psychiatric survivor. She's a shaman in the Sangoma tradition of South Africa with a private practice based in Southern California. So welcome to Madness Radio, Gogo Ekhaya Esima.
Thank you. It's such a blessing to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
It's been great to meet you through the Crazy Wise film that we're both a part of, and we were recently in the Crazy Wise town hall, and people can check out Crazy Wise on the internet. And the topic is, I think, of great interest to listeners, the idea that what gets called a psychiatric crisis or a mental illness might actually be the signs of an initiation into being a shaman or a traditional healer, having some kind of positive role to play as a healer and teacher in the community. So I'm really interested to have you on the show. And I should also mention that Madness Radio is now a affiliate radio show of Mad in America Radio. So thanks to Mad in America for sponsoring us and for inviting us to become an affiliate. And if people want more information about other Mad in America radio programs, just go to the madinamerica.com website. So maybe we should just get started. Tell us how you got involved in all this. How did you first start having mental health problems, and then how did that evolve into your discovery of your calling and your vocation as a healer?
Sure. I suffered from depression for most of my life, through childhood on through adulthood, and a lot of that was suppressed in my family, and so it really wasn't addressed. And then about when I was in my early 30s, I started to see things that other people didn't see and have some auditory interruptions as well. Um, and at that time, I felt like my whole world was crashing in front of me. So I attempted suicide several times. And the last time that happened, I woke up in the hospital room and realized that I was still alive. And from that point on, I decided to start looking for my purpose in life, because apparently someone, something, some energy wanted me to remain here.
So when you say depression, you suffered with this your whole life. What kind of depression was it, or how did it sort of affect you?
Yeah, depression affected me. I mean, I think they diagnosed me with major depressive disorder. You know, it affected me in the way where I was in and out of work a lot. Like there's some points of in my life where I couldn't wake up and actually get up to go to work. Um, so it was hard for me to keep employment. I lost contact with my children, which further deepened my depression. I'm the mother of three boys, and so being far away from them and feeling hopeless a lot really left me kind of in the trenches. And then uh, not dealing with some trauma that I experienced through my childhood, through sexual abuse and that sort of thing, really was just pressing down on me as I became older. And yeah, I just had to do something about it.
And this was something that was connected with your own trauma experiences, your own abuse experiences that weren't dealt with.
Yeah, they weren't dealt with. I mean, I believe my family did as, you know, my mom did as much as she could at the time with her experience. But after you know, she did what she could, everything was swept under the rug. Like I was just supposed to forget about everything and move on with my life. And the abuser was still in my life, still able to see me. So it was just really strange. And I didn't know who to trust in life, and was, you know, even had symptoms or issues of paranoia where I would get around people and have really intense social anxiety as well, and feel like that I couldn't trust anyone around me.
So your abuser was still in your life. So this was an ongoing threat, really, that you were experiencing. So the depression, it sounds like, was really related to this situation of violence and kind of powerlessness of being not being able to really get safety in your life,
Yeah,
something like
definitely
that.
not to get not feeling safe and not being able to vocalize my truth. I think that was the big part of like my experiences is not having the ability to communicate in the way that was healing for myself.
So you weren't able to challenge or confront this abuser or speak what your truth
Right,
was.
not until way later.
And was this because this was a family dynamic, or was it a social cultural issue? What was going on that you weren't supported and validated?
Well, I think there were a lot of issues. It happened when I was a lot younger as a child, and it was my father. So my father was actually put away for a few months, and then he
He was in jail.
yeah, he was institutionalized in some way, shape, or form. It was a little less than jail, but when he came back after a couple months, he asked my mother if he could speak to me, and my mother said, okay, and she opened up that door for him to come back into my life. And then she eventually married him some years later. So that was a part of my distress that I carried and the burden that I carried throughout my life.
And how old was this when he came back into your life?
I would say about 7 years old.
Wow. So that creates a very confusing and complicated family reality for someone so young to really understand what's going on and how to feel safe. And so then you carried this kind of depression that wasn't dealt with, and it sounds like it really came to a culmination with really extreme states. You said you started to see things and have experiences that other people weren't having. What were those about? And what is it that kind of brought you to that point? Was it more stress or something was pressurizing you, or what is it that drove the depression to take it to another level like that?
Yeah, I think the depression just got really, really bad, and my father had passed about 4 years prior to this experience, and I lived I was actually in another abusive relationship with a partner, and I could not leave my apartment. I lived in a one-room apartment, and I couldn't leave. I couldn't step out the outside of the house because I was so paranoid. And as I sat in that room for a period of months, I started to like my world started to open up. I started to see people who weren't alive, including my father, and I started to self-harm.
And was the abusive relationship that you got into, do you think that that was related to the fact that you had been abused by your father?
Yeah, I definitely think that was a trigger because it was more of a controlling abuse and also abuse in the way of like sexually forcing um, himself as well. So all of that brought back all of this stuff from my childhood, and then the fact that I couldn't keep work, and then the fact that I couldn't be with my children, and all these things pressing down on me at the same time really began to open up this wounding in a way that wasn't beneficial because the voices that I started to hear and the visions that I saw were definitely negative. They weren't anything of light or positivity. And I would hear voices that would tell me to cut myself or that I needed to die and all of those things.
So you're starting to have these very scary negative experiences, and at the same time you describe it as an opening. So was it somehow an opening to an other realm, a spiritual realm? Because I think that you have a framing of this that maybe is different than a lot of the trauma therapies would say, oh, these are symptoms of flashbacks and trauma, but you're sort of taking it a little bit differently, that it's negative, but at the same time it's also kind of an opening to other realms of reality. Is that right?
Yes, it definitely was an opening. And now that I look back on it in retrospect, at the time I didn't quite understand, but it was definitely an opening of these gifts that I had to see into other worlds. but at the time, it definitely felt very opposite than a gift. It was torture. And so, and I know that a lot of people have experiences where their energy is very heightened, and they have experiences of feeling that we're all connected and that we're all one and all of these things. And I think that is part of the light. And then my experience was more a part of seeing the darkness.
So we're going to come back to this because in working with a lot of people who have what are called spiritual emergence or shamanic initiation or spiritual opening processes, this is really such the central issue. How do you sort out the negative and the positive? How do you sort out the trauma from the gift? So we're going to come back to this because this is a really key piece of the whole question that we're exploring. And I also think it's really interesting and significant about what you say that you weren't in a kind of like a manic, so-called expanded state where things were positive and excited and inspiring. You're in kind of this dark, paranoid place. You're really sort of disconnecting into these very negative energies. And some of the literature around spiritual emergence, some of the approaches that have come from Stan and Christina Groff, for example, would kind of say, well, these are the really psychotic people. These are the ones who are having these paranoid, negative experiences. They're not really having spiritual emergence, but actually you were, and you were able to navigate that. And so I think this is a very interesting question: how you took this negative seeming energy and then transformed it into the gift. So we're gonna get into that. So tell us about, it sounds like the breaking point was really the suicide attempts. You reached a point where these visions and these voices and this paranoia really drove you to attempt suicide, and then you wake up in the hospital and you're alive. And was that the turning point that you started to take charge of things and start to really move in a direction to kind of find out what you needed for yourself?
Yes, that was absolutely the turning point. And while I was unconscious for that time for a couple days, I really think,
Can I ask you what was it that you did? You take pills, or what was it that was the suicide attempt?
yeah, I took a bottle of my one of my antipsychotics.
It's heartbreaking. I hear this so much that people are, they go home from the hospital or they get their prescription and then they've got the means right there that's been given to them by the mental health system for attempting suicide. And so you took a lethal dose, but you woke up. Why is it that, did you just get lucky, or did someone find you, or what is it that happened that you were able to survive that?
Yeah, I was I passed out outside, um, and so there was somebody that was able to find me and take me in.
Do you think there was a part of you that wanted to live, that maybe you were in so much pain that, you know, some part of you wanted to die, but there was still at least a little part of you that wanted to survive, and so you ended up being outside, or something kind of was taking care of you, a part of you was taking care of you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there was a part of me. There was something that wanted to live, but so much of my experiences, I was just I felt like that it was too much to handle to be in this world.
Was there a point at which it got too much? Do you remember that point that was kind of, okay, this is it, I can't go anymore, I have to try and end my life?
Yeah, right. I think right before that, like I was hospitalized for a couple months, and then I was released into a homeless shelter. Got homeless shelter and started to experience these things again. And I called the nurse actually that was helping me in the psychiatric ward, and she said, just come back because the situation was really hostile, and I'd never been in a homeless shelter like that, and it was in New York City, and I felt really unsafe, and I started to feel paranoid and all those things again. And she told me to come back, but the when I went back, the admitting psychiatrist didn't believe me, like didn't believe my experiences, and he pretty much told me that he didn't believe me, and told me to leave.
He told you he didn't believe that you were suffering so much and that you were in such an extreme place.
Right, and he told me to leave.
Wow. What a that feels like a real betrayal. That would be really upsetting for anybody, I think.
Yeah, and then so I walked out, and I was on my way home, and I decided that I was going to take the bottle of pills at that time.
So the kind of the mistreatment was sort of the trigger, the way in which you got this mixed message. One professional says come in, and the other one says no, 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 I don't believe you, that you're really suffering. We're not going to actually help you. That must have felt like a real betrayal.
Yeah, and I was just so over the in and out all the time, and not feeling like things were working.
I know also that a lot of traditions talk about death being a teacher, because you really confronted your own death in a sense. You were right there at the edge of the abyss. Do you think that was part of the turning point, was having that encounter with death?
Yes, I know that was a turning point, and in shamanism, we call it the dark night of the soul. Really experiencing, being able to experiencing our darkness and get to a point, a very, very low point, so that we can emerge out and become something new.
How did you then get interested in traditional South African shamanism?
Okay, so during that time, I had trained in pranayama, which is, a form of yogic meditation. And I kept searching. I would leave work and come home and research for hours about shamanism and healing and traditional ways of healing. And I was listening to a woman's blog talk radio show who was a traditional healer, a Sangoma, and she was so overjoyed on those radio shows, and I thought, wow, she's too happy. I could never like talk to her. But eventually, I decided I was going to reach out to her, and I got a what we call an ancestral divination, and it's actually a form of diagnosing a person's spiritual self.
Now, this was the Sangoma. This was a South African healer that you.
Yeah, Sangomas are South African traditional healers, and we use a form of ancient oracle or divination tools to communicate with our ancestral guardians, to see what's happening with the person sitting in front of us. And so I was able to get a divination from her.
That's so great to hear that it was a podcast that was the turning point that connected you with
Yeah,
shamanism.
podcast changed lives.
Okay,
Yes.
so this is very far out from the perspective of psychiatry and the DSM. And tell us what you mean by ancestral divination. Is it a kind of an understanding of how relationship with our family history relates to the suffering that we have today, or how does that work? And you say it's an oracle. So what exactly went into that reading, and how do you do them now that you've learned to do these?
Okay, so the ancestral reading, it is a tool that looks at the person's spiritual self and how their ancestors are doing in the spiritual realm and their guardians are doing in the spiritual realm. And as we like to say, as above, so below. So what is affecting us in the spirit form or in the spirit world will also trickle down in this physical form. And so we believe as Sangomas that a lot of our imbalances, or what people call, mental illness, things like that, or psychosis, may come from something that's happening in the spiritual realm. And I like to make this analogy, like when people go to the doctor and they sit in front of the doctor, the doctor asks them a list of questions like, what's your father's history and what's your mother's history? And do you have cancer on this side or do you have this on that side? And it's the same thing with the ancestral divination, but the, the person sitting in front of us getting the consultation, they don't say anything about themselves. So we actually just get their name and their father's last name and their mother's last name, and then we go into a trance state to pull information from the spiritual realm and talk to the people about their ancestors. In African traditions, we believe that our ancestors are an essential part of how we work in this lifetime because we share their blood. So no difference from going to the doctor and saying it's likely that I could get cancer because everybody on my mother's side had it. And so we're looking at what your ancestors carried in their lifetimes and what needs to be cleansed in order for you to actually release those things ancestrally in your lineages, so that you can have a more balanced life.
I think that there's a kind of a modern form of it in family therapy and things like open dialogue, where basically we're just kind of recapitulating in a psychological language of modern Western science. We're sort of rehashing what has been known from indigenous perspectives traditionally throughout human history as a core to how you heal, by understanding the relationships that you have and then taking them all the way back. And what you're saying is that you go a step further, that you communicate with the spirits of the dead ancestors. And it sounds like when you were having those struggles, when you were in the abusive relationship, when you were alone and isolated in your apartment and couldn't leave, and you had these openings, was that the same kind of skill that you're able to go into those other realms and communicate with those ancestors? But in that situation, it was negative and traumatic and terrifying and overwhelming. But now the same opening becomes a skill in this divination tool that you use.
Yes. And through initiation, we learn how to manage that and how to navigate into those spiritual forms so that we can be safe and that we can help people out of their own darkness.
And which I think is a huge question for a lot of the people listening, is that how do you do that? How do you exactly navigate and learn how to pull it apart and make it so that it's not overwhelming, and to not just see it as a negative thing, I have to shut it down, but keep the opening, but somehow work with it. And tell us about that first divination that you got, because here you are, you've struggled with this incredible abuse history and this depression, and then the paranoia and the suicide attempts. You're been diagnosed as a mental patient, you're seen as a disorder, and then this very different perspective comes in that says, look, this is about your ancestral struggles and about the spirits of people who've passed, and you were given a divination. Give us an example, like what was it that you were told, and then how did it make sense in terms of your own struggles, and how was it useful to you, and what did actually the divination say?
So I got the divination, and by Gogo Nana, who's my teacher, and I had written down a list of questions of everything that I wanted to ask her. And before I even answered or got to ask any questions, she actually answered all of my questions.
So she has these psychic or paranormal or spiritual abilities. She's a seer or a medium or a visionary. And what were some of the questions that you got answered?
Well, one of the questions is that I had written down is I knew that there was like an ancestor in my home, a spirit in my home that I was seeing, and I just wanted her to acknowledge or confirm, or if she knew anything about it. And so I had that question written down, and she, without hesitation, said, "You know, you have an energy in your home, and it's your father, and he did this to you." And she didn't know me from anyone else, and she only asked me my name. So read my life from childhood to that present moment, and was very detail oriented in everything that she described. And one of my last questions that I had written down is was I supposed to have some sort of shamanic training or initiation? And she at the end she said, you're supposed to be doing what I'm doing. You have a calling, a spiritual calling to become a priestess or a shaman or a healer. And I know from that point I was just in tears because it so resonated with my spirit, and she was on point about everything that I experienced. And she, when I first met her, she told me that I wasn't crazy, which was amazing because from everybody else, it looked like, or family and friends, and and being in the hospital, everybody was telling me that I was. And so she was the first person outside of the peer world that told me that I wasn't.
That goes a long way for building trust, telling a person that you're not crazy. Just for everybody out there listening, that's one of the key things that you need to be doing if you want to actually connect and relate to people. And it sounds like one of the key things was how it resonated with you. But I also know that there are situations where someone goes to a psychic, or they go to a healer, or they go to a shaman, and then the person really isn't honest, or the person is unscrupulous. There are those shamans, healers out there. So, what do you think was the difference? How is it that you were able to find and connect and feel good about someone and have a good experience? And what kind of advice or guidance would you give people to finding someone that they really have a good connection with? Because people are often very vulnerable. They can be really taken advantage of and really exploited. So, why do you think it worked for you when it might not work for someone else? And what would you give as advice for someone who does want to start exploring this world?
Yeah, for me, I felt like I was definitely guided intuitively and by my ancestral guardians to get to her. But there was also a deep connection. It took me a while to actually go to her, but I listened to her blog talk radios and I knew that she had a story just like mine. She is also a peer herself. She had experienced abuse in her life, and so we had stories that were relatable. And I think that was the biggest connection that, I could see myself in her.
Were you sort of checking her out when she would tell her personal stories? Was that allowed you to sort of see whether you could trust her or not? Because I think that's a big part of what we teach in the peer movement is that disclosure and being open about who we are is what allows us to get a sense of somebody and start to trust them rather than having this kind of wall up that the person is hiding behind as a professional. And then you have no idea whether to trust them or not. So you just sort of say, well, I guess I better trust you because you have the authority and you have the position and you have the institutional role. But all of your intuitive kind of ability to check somebody out and trust them isn't really operating because they're not disclosing who they are. So was that a key part of why you connected and resonated, do you think?
Yeah, that was definitely a key part of how and why I connected with her. And I feel like it's important if someone is going to look for a traditional healer, look at their background, look at their testimonies. Each person should be able to talk to you, on the phone before you actually spend any money. You make sure that it feels right to you and relatable to you in a way that is clear. So for me, her story definitely resonated with my story, and I felt comfortable enough to say yes. And I was a non believer in the sense of spending money on a reading. Like, I would never do that. I just, it wasn't in my processing or thinking, but um, something was really, my divine spirits were really guiding me to get there and get the information from her.
So you got this divination, which just really clicks and feels really right on, and she's giving you information that there's no other way she could have gotten because you didn't tell her. How did it help you?
Well, after the call, I felt completely liberated. I felt free and confirmed, from everything that I was experiencing. So after a ancestral reading, that's the diagnostic tool that we use, but then there is a sort of prescription. So I had a prescription that I had to follow for 21 days and also to follow up with her for a healing session. And after the 21 days, I went to where she was for my first healing session.
I'm curious, what was the prescription that she gave you?
I can't go into complete detail with all of it, but it's definitely some cleansing ritual and just things to follow each day for 21 days. And one of them was no sugar, which I'm very big on.
So she's giving you a spiritual diagnosis, but then the treatment is a comprehensive, holistic approach that addresses your body and addresses the food that you eat as well as the spiritual dimension.
Yes, because it's all very connected. There's no separation. And so, yeah, I was on it for those 21 days, and then I went to go see her for my healing session and had a profound experience there.
What was the healing session?
The healing session was very shamanic in the way of drumming and calling on the ancestral spirits. And because I had a calling, she did a spiritual cleansing for me and a certain ritual through drumming and sound to help bring up my guardian spirits. And once she started doing that, I didn't know what she was doing at the time, but once she started doing that, I felt a shift within my body and I started to go into a trance state. And it was a really powerful experience because I felt like I was free to let go, of some of the things that happened to me behind closed doors. when I'm by myself, that someone was actually holding space for that time for me to explore. So I went into that trance space and found the connection with my guardian spirits. And from that time on, I knew that I needed to go into initiation, and I knew that it was going to be my saving grace because it was a really, really powerful experience.
Now, you say she was herself a survivor. Did she identify these so-called psychotic experiences that you were having that would have been seen as symptoms? Did she recognize that, okay, the paranoia and the opening and the voices that you had, did she see those as part of your gifts in terms of becoming a healer and a shaman yourself?
Yes, she absolutely saw those as my gifts, and she had expressed her experiences with depression and trauma and all those things, but definitely saw that my experiences were not just mental illness, that there was something happening that she could see in the spiritual realm for me that was different. And I must say that everybody that has these experiences do not actually have a calling to initiate into shamanism, shamanic practice. There can be many different reasons for someone to experience these things. It could just be that there are ancestral spirits that need cleansing and help. It could be what we call negative spirit attachment. It could be a whole slew of things. And so that's why we're going into a trance mode, into that divinatory mode to see exactly what's happening with the person.
Can you tell us a little bit about that tradition? You say South Africa, and what is it from, and how does it connect to indigenous cultures there?
Absolutely. So the Nguni people of South Africa um, are, and there's Xhosa people, Zulu, there are a whole tribe of people that are medicine people there. And even today, over 70% of the population go to see traditional healers for their physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual work. Traditional healers, Sangomas, we use a form of trance dance, of drumming, of ceremonial and ritual work to help release, um, to help heal people um, from all kinds of ailments.
Tell us about your training. What is it that you needed to do to learn to be a shaman, and how long did it take? And were there times when you felt like you couldn't do it, or it was too hard or too challenging, or what was it that the training involved?
So the training involved a lot of things, and I went in very high energy because I felt like that this was going to be, it was a life or death matter for me. Um, and so, looking back at it, I felt like I had a certain amount of resilience that, maybe somebody with those, not those kinds of experience wouldn't have had. It's a very difficult, physically challenging, and challenging on all levels. Training. We are to humble ourselves to the earth, so we're always very close to the earth. And initiates go through a certain amount of rituals every day that they must do. There's lots of internal medicine that's taken. There's uh, cleansing all of the time. And your dreams are what really gets you through to the next level. So you have certain dreams, and then your teacher knows that you're ready to go on to the next thing. So in my training, I was able to go into those trance states and learn how to navigate the spiritual world. And through that process, we had challenges where we had to find hidden objects, like someone visiting our house or the house where we were training at, or our teacher would have any object that she wanted, natural or man made, and hide it somewhere outside or inside the house. And part of our training was to build our intuition and tell her exactly what the item was and where it was located. And then we'd had to run and go get it without hesitation and bring it back. And so you learn the aspect of finding missing items. You learn the sacred dances that help you heal and also help others heal. We initiate to certain nature spirits as well. So it's a long and arduous process for some people, but it really depends on your dedication to the process and what your how your dreams are happening. So someone could go in and finish in 6 months as opposed to someone going in and taking 6 years. There's no cut and dry, you sit in the classroom and this is how long it's going to take. It really depends on you and your spirit who are carrying you through.
Now I know that there's a lot of things that it wouldn't be appropriate to talk about the training and the tradition and everything. But can you give us an example or a sense of one of these dreams that gave you some guidance and how you interpreted that, or how your teacher helped you interpret that?
Yeah, I had to report my dreams every morning once I woke up, journal them and then report them. So I would go into more of dreams that were healing dreams for me. Like there was an experience that happened when I was a child where my mother and father, my mother would tell me this story that they had a big argument, and my mother had me down on the sofa and she went into the kitchen, to leave the argument, and my father was there, and all of a sudden she hear me screaming from the top of my lungs. I was like 3 months old, and came into the room and found me on the floor. And she said my father told her that I had fallen off the couch, but my arm was broken. But in the dream, I went back and I was able to see that my father yanked me in a way like he was upset, and he, yanked me and actually broke my arm. And so that trauma, like I didn't actually remember that trauma, but it was able to come back up in the dream so that I could see it and heal from it. So there's things that come up in the dream world that are revealed so that we can actually, it can come to the surface and that we can heal. So I had many dreams, different dreams like that. And I really can't share the ones that were about the progression of the process, but definitely some powerful, powerful dreams.
So a traumatic memory that was lost to you comes back through the dream, then you report it to your teacher, and then you said you healed from it. Was it because you felt the feelings or you had a new understanding? What was the healing?
I had a new understanding, but then I was able to go to my teacher and we are able to process that together. And through that process, I'm learning dream interpretation. So,
Like process it in terms of go through the emotions and talk about your feelings and thoughts, about like a counseling session.
yeah, almost, yeah, pretty much. But and the counseling session includes, all the tools that we use as well. So the next time I would visit her house, she would talk about the dream, and then we do singing and drumming, tonal, and the drum. Sangoma means people of the drum. So through that drumming and through that work, I was able to heal and release things that came up on a regular basis. I would visit her every
This
weekend.
is something that I've seen so much in the people that I work with as well as in myself. I mean, especially if someone seems stuck or they seem like there's not like what's going on here, there's not asking them about a dream, and wow, you just get this huge roadmap. And again, in terms of shamanism in general, dreams are so central to shamanic traditions all over the world. There was something that you mentioned earlier about navigating. Tell us what that means. You say you go into trance, you learn to navigate these spirit realms. These, are you using breath? Are you using visualization? Are you using beliefs and practices and the drums? Or how is the navigation work? Because I think this is a lot of where people are interested in shamanism, to be able to protect themselves, to ground themselves, to feel calm and safe and not get overwhelmed and still be able to explore. And that, I think, is the navigation that's missing when someone is overwhelmed by traumatic experiences and they have all these negative visions and voices. And so how does the navigation actually work? What are the skills there?
There are definitely specific skills, but I think what is the most helpful part of that is that the constant cleansing of my internal body and my spiritual body so that I could be stronger when I went to those places, because I was going to those places without being under initiation. So under initiation, you have this guardian, which is your teacher, to help you through. And so, really going in and being able to connect with your divine spirits as your anchor, as your protection, and the medicine that is behind you was important. I'm unable to share exactly all the tools, like in the forms of navigating the trance experience, because that is part of initiation. But, the essential part of this was having someone to teach me how to do that, someone to say, okay, this is what when you went, let's talk about what happened, what did you see, who did you see, how to identify these spirits, whether it was a nature spirit or whether it was an ancestral guardian, or, what was happening. And one of the practices of what we do is called sniffing out spirit. And it's a ritual that allows us to, if a patient comes, or a person comes to us, we will go into a trance state and are able to point out blockages in their auric body and in their spiritual body, and remove illness and sicknesses. So in that spiritual realm, I was able to meet my guardians, connect with them, and to have them be a force, so that when I can come back into this physical form, I'd be able to hold their energy and the power. And when I first started to do this initiation, I would literally pass out on the floor. Like, it was so much energy to just stand up and hold myself up. So a big part of my training was becoming physically equipped to be able to hold all the energy um, that the guardian spirits carry.
Did your body get physically stronger? Do you feel like you got healthier and more athletically fit and stronger as part of this whole process?
Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely through the dancing. And, like I said, at first I would pass out. And then, by the end of my training, I was able to dance the spirits and to hold my body up better, and definitely became physically stronger, because there's also certain diet regimens that are important. Nutrition is absolutely very much important.
Do you think that's one of the key things about how to differentiate or how to work with those negative energies, is connecting with your body? Because you mentioned before that sometimes people have these spiritual openings that get called mania, and they're a spiritual emergence process, but it's very positive and light and lifted and inspiring and enthusiastic, and the person has a positive message that they're giving to the world. But that wasn't what you went through. And what you went through was more negative, paranoia, frightening, self-harm, suicidal feelings. And what we often are hearing in the spiritual emergence kind of literature is that, well, those people aren't really the ones that are equipped. Those negative experiences aren't really part of spiritual emergence and spiritual awakening. That's really psychosis. But that's what you went through. So what was it that do you think makes the difference in terms of helping people with these negative experiences?
Yeah, in shamanism, you have to go into the dark places in order to help to find your light, and to help people to find their own light. And that's all about, you hear about the wounded healer's journey. And to answer your question, yes, being grounded in a way, and having myself come back into my body. So I talked a lot about trance, but there was definitely a lot of work about around grounding and feeling what was happening inside of my body. But when I did get back into my body would shake, or my head would turn different ways. And, some people talk about the Kundalini energy, and how, it can make an arm flail or move, involuntary movements were happening during my Twaza process, because I was just now getting back into my body and feeling it for the first time in a very long time. And so, in my perspective, what was happening was that there were other energies that were attached and taking kind of using my body in the form of self harm and that sort of thing. So I had to reconnect to my body, absolutely, in order to connect to my divine self and my divine spirit.
That's another way that it connects up with somatic approaches to trauma healing in Western psychology. I'm thinking of somatic experiencing, Peter Levine's work, or sensory motor psychotherapy, that these involuntary movements like shaking, it's a release of traumatic energy. It's a part of an unwinding of a discharge of this traumatic energy. And it's a sign that the trauma is actually resolving itself rather than being caught and trapped in the body and then showing up as these symptoms.
Absolutely. Yes, and so a lot of that energy releasing was happening in order for my guardian spirits to actually merge with me. And we talk about the yin and yang, the dark and the light. And you have to go through the dark night of the soul in order to help people out of their own dark night. So I had to look within myself and see everything that was there and everything that I, didn't want to face and that I was running away from my whole life, and facing it now with an armor of ancestral spirits behind me and medicine that was with me in order to become a warrior, so to speak.
Beautiful. Ekhaya, one of the things that we hear in shamanic traditions and associated with that kind of worldview is the idea of evil spirits and, entities and, protecting ourselves from evil spirits. And I think this can be kind of scary for a lot of people because, I mean, the idea of good and bad, black and white, that there's absolute evil out there is a pretty overwhelming thought. So help us understand how the shamanic traditions kind of view evil and entities and spirits and that kind of thing.
Sure. I can speak for Sangoma. We definitely have tools and rituals around removing negative entities. And as far as dealing with it on a personal level, there were definitely some very dark things there, like I had mentioned before. But it was about me recognizing what we call, the term used now is the shadow self. I am light, and I have a shadow, I have darkness, and that is all a part of me. And I have love for every part of that, every part of the whole that completes me, and out of the darkness becomes lots of beauty. You were talking about nature, and we think of tsunamis, and how the ocean and the rain can give us um, you know feeding our earth and growing our food and all of those things, but then it can also wipe some things out, and flood. So there's a dynamic and two sides to everything, and being of acceptance of that, even to this day, I'm still working on being acceptance of all the shadow parts of me. And the more that I love them, the more that they become less relevant in my life. So I'm really all about merging the two and acknowledging the fact that yes, we are light workers. We work from light. That's the type of work that I do. And I'm also acknowledging that darkness, those dark energies. And yes, they are very present. And it is a force in our life. We see it every day. But how do we merge the two and balance the two so that what bothers us and hinders us and blocks us becomes less relevant through working on our fears, because our fears can create so much more of the heaviness.
It's so different than the training that psychiatrists have or doctors have. It's a self awareness. It's a looking inside of ourselves and healing ourselves, and that gives us the capacity to understand and reach out and to heal the other. That understanding our own shadow side, helps us to protect from not just dumping it on the other or expressing it on the other without awareness and consciousness. And that's something that I think Western doctors and Western medicine doesn't do. There's an objective, like, oh, it's not a personal thing. The doctor's personal life or their personal experience doesn't come into this. It's just a technology that they're using. And I think that's very dangerous in the realm of human relationships. I wanted to also ask you about the role of plant spirits. Plants are really important in shamanism. In a lot of the shamanic traditions, they use psychedelic plants, and that's part of the trance states that the shamans go into, whether it's ayahuasca or psilocybin mushrooms or the different psychoactive plants that people are using. But how is the tradition that you are part of? How do you relate to plant spirit medicines?
I work with plant medicines on a daily basis, and with the people that I work with as well. I don't work with a lot of psychedelics, but there are psychedelics in our tradition. We have a very light herb called impepo, Impepo is something that you would use kind of like sage here to clear the area or smudge your space. But we also use it, we inhale the smoke to induce trance. So there is that component to the Impepo. I mean, that's something that I would use on a daily basis, and it's very light. But there are over 2,000 medications in South Africa just focused on things dealing with the mind and madness. So there's so many earth medicines that are used, whether you're bathing with them, whether you're steaming with them, whether you drink them and then purge them. We have lots of different purging medicines. So plant medicines are a big part of my work, and I use them personally on a daily basis.
Have you found them effective? Do they help you with your own issues of paranoia and depression and these kinds of things you've been struggling with?
When I was talking about the bathing, the steaming, and the purging, that is something that I did through my entire training, my entire initiation. And for the upkeep of my own spirit and my mind, I continue to do those on a regular basis to this day.
Ekhaya, we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to ask you one question more just about what kind of advice would you give to someone who maybe is a psychiatric survivor who's been through some really difficult experiences that would get called psychosis from a Western psychiatry perspective and is interested in shamanism and is wondering, well, maybe I have a shamanic calling or maybe this is something that speaks to me. What advice or guidance would you have for them?
You know, the advice I would have for them is to seek out a mentor or someone who resonates with your being, check up on them, ask questions. Again, look at their testimonies, um, and and go reach out to somebody. A lot of times, we like to get on YouTube and look at a whole bunch of videos and do things on our own. But the importance of somebody holding space um, and being able to consult with somebody is so important. It can be any shamanic tradition that you're called to. Um, I'd say go to that and find an elder in that community or someone that um, you feel like you can really trust to consult with and get a reading. For me, I knew that my ancestors, were here but came from the West African area. I didn't know that even further back in my lineage, there were also South Africans. So I also honor those West African spirits that are with me. Definitely the ones that are here, the grandmothers and grandfathers that I did um, hear of stories of. But I think it's important to connect back to your own traditions, whether it be Celtic or Native or African. And sometimes, I understand, especially in Europe, a lot of those traditions were forgotten. And so you see many Europeans going to Africa to pick up the ways and the rituals so that they can start to remember their own ancestors as well. So it's not really based on color because we have shamanism down in South America, that's really big, and the natives. So it's just really what calls to your spirit. But I really feel like it's definitely important to uncover some of those truths within your own lineage first.
So you would see someone who maybe has European cultural ancestry, if they're called to be part of the South African shamanic tradition, that would be a legitimate thing for them to explore and to go into.
That happens a lot. One of my best friends is a white Sangoma, and it's because she had a calling to pick up ancestral ways. It may have not been her European ancestors, but through that she was able to connect to them. And so with some of the lost traditions, I think that it's vital and important for the healing of our world and our earth.
Ekhaya, we are just about out of time in the interview. Give us the web address of your website and how people can get in contact with you if they want to find out more about you and your work.
Sure. I have a practice here in Southern California, as you spoke of before. Um, and the website is sangomahealing.com. That's SANGOMA healing.com. And then I also have a Facebook, Sangoma Healing.
Gogo, Ekhaya, Esima, thank you so much for joining us today on Madness Radio.
Thank you so much, Will. It's very nice, and I appreciate and am humbled that you invited me here to speak to your audience. You're doing beautiful work.
You've been listening to an interview with Gogo Ekhaya Esima. Gogo Ekhaya is a traditional healer, teacher, and psychiatric survivor. She's a shaman in the Sangoma tradition of South Africa, and she has a private practice based in Southern California. That's all the time we have on Madness Radio. Thanks for tuning in. You've been listening to Madness Radio, Voices and Visions from Outside Mental Health. Madness Radio is sponsored by the Icarus Project and Portland Hearing Voices. Host is Will Hall and producer is Nina Packabush. Madness Radio can be heard on KBOO-FM and the Pacifica Network, and shows are archived online at madnessradio.net.